A famous skeptic who debunks supernatural frauds begins doubting everything after investigating this strange case. The film begins with a short but intriguing scene where a bird flies through the air and suddenly crashes into a window. Before the audience can fully process what just happened, the scene immediately shifts to a bar mitzvah celebration, a Jewish religious ceremony that marks the moment a boy enters adulthood. The boy celebrating this important milestone is Philip. What should have been a joyful day actually carries a deeper meaning for him, because since childhood, Philip had already felt the powerful religious influence of his father within their household. For Philip, his father's strict devotion to religious beliefs felt more oppressive than comforting, slowly damaging the harmony of their family. One of the memories that stayed with him the most was when his older sister was thrown out of the house simply because she was in a relationship with a man their father believed was not suitable for the family. That childhood experience shaped the way Philip viewed many things in life, including his attitude toward anything considered supernatural. As an adult, Philip becomes known as a very skeptical person. He works as a television host who focuses on paranormal phenomena, but not to promote belief in them. Instead, his goal is to expose them as frauds. Through his program, Philip frequently reveals the tricks used by people who claim to possess mystical abilities, earning him a reputation as someone who boldly challenges and debunks supernatural claims. In many ways, his work resembles that of an investigator who attempts to uncover the truth behind mysterious stories that people often believe without question. Besides his complicated religious upbringing, Philip's way of thinking is also heavily influenced by someone he deeply admires, a well-known psychologist named Charles. In one of his studies, Charles demonstrated how experiences often interpreted as supernatural could actually be explained through scientific reasoning. He once examined a woman who claimed she could still hear the voice of a family member who had already passed away.
Is she possessed?
No, she's angry that her husband died.
Why do you think the voices come through you, Jean?
Daddy sees everything. Jeez.
For the vase, I did that.
After careful observation, Charles concluded that the experience was actually an emotional response from someone who had not fully accepted the loss of a loved one. Explanations like this strengthened Philip's belief that many so-called supernatural events actually have far more logical explanations. However, one day something unusual happens. Charles suddenly disappears without leaving any trace. No one knows where he went, and the only clue left behind is his car, found empty, with its door open near his home. Time passes without any news about him until one afternoon, Philip receives a letter that completely surprises him. The letter turns out to be from Charles himself. In it, Charles explains that he is still alive and now living alone in rather poor conditions inside an old caravan located at East Shore number 79. Driven by curiosity, Philip quickly decides to visit the address.
Professor Goodman, this is Charles. Please come to 79 East Shore.
But the meeting he imagined would be warm and welcoming turns out to be quite strange. Instead of greeting Philip kindly, Charles appears cynical and even mocks the television work Philip has been doing. After that, Charles presents Philip with a challenge by handing him 3 mysterious cases that he claims cannot be explained logically. Charles even admits that these 3 cases are the reason he has started to believe that perhaps some things cannot be explained by reason and science alone. Because of that, Philip is asked to investigate the cases and prove that they can still be explained rationally. Hearing this naturally confuses Philip. For years, he had known Charles as someone who consistently proved that supernatural phenomena were not real. Yet now, the same man seems to have changed his mind. Even so, Philip's curiosity eventually leads him to accept the challenge. This is where Philip's journey to investigate the 3 mysterious cases begins.
Hello, I'm Philip Goodman.
I know you are. I have seen your work. It's shit. 3 cases to debunk and disprove it's all true. I couldn't explain 3 cases that haunt me.
However, after Philip leaves the caravan, he briefly notices a mysterious figure wearing a hoodie standing behind Charles. After leaving the place, Philip is later seen sitting alone on the edge of the beach while thinking about everything that has just happened. It is still hard for him to believe that the man he has admired for so long is now admitting the possibility of something supernatural. While lost in thought, his attention briefly turns to 3 teenagers not far from where he is sitting. One of them appears to be treating another boy roughly, while the third teenager simply stands there watching without doing anything. Not long after that moment, the investigation of the first case finally begins. Philip meets a man named Tony, a night shift security guard working at a healthcare facility in England. Tony's life has not been easy. His wife died of cancer 23 years ago, and his only daughter has spent the last 5 years lying in a hospital bed due to a rare medical condition known as locked-in syndrome. In that condition, a person appears conscious because their eyes remain open, but almost their entire body cannot move at all. During their meeting, Tony begins telling Philip about a strange experience he once had while working one night. At that time, he was performing his usual duties inside an old psychiatric hospital building. That night, he was working alongside a colleague named Marek, although they were stationed in different buildings. Because the structure was already quite old, power outages happened frequently, including that night when all the lights suddenly went out.
Hello? Marek?
Tony leaves his security post to restart the power generator, but when he returns to his post, the glass he had left on the table is suddenly near the door as if someone had moved it while he was gone. Tony tries to ignore the incident and sits back down in his chair, but not long after that, the electricity goes out again. When he goes to check the generator once more, Tony notices strange scratches on its surface that look like marks made by 5 human fingers. Seeing that, Tony begins to believe that someone might have sneaked into the building. He knows Marek is still in another building, so it clearly cannot be his co-worker. Feeling uneasy, Tony decides to check the patient ward. To calm himself a little, he turns on the radio loudly and asks Marek to stay connected with him through their communication device. After making sure the generator's running again, Tony walks through the dark corridor of the ward. To calm himself, he pauses in front of a patient room marked number 92 and lights a cigarette. Suddenly, Tony is startled when he sees a young girl wearing yellow appear out of nowhere in front of him. He immediately checks his surroundings, trying to confirm what he actually saw. On one of the patient beds, he sees a figure he recognizes very well, his own daughter. The girl is sitting on the bed while slowly shaking her head. Tony cautiously walks closer, but when he finally reaches the bed, the figure he saw turns out to be nothing more than a cleaning mop. The situation becomes even more confusing when the electricity in the ward goes out again. Tony walks back to the generator to fix it once more, but this time he discovers that someone has deliberately damaged the generator cable. Growing increasingly suspicious, Tony begins checking the patient rooms one by one to make sure there is no intruder inside the building. Eventually, he reaches room number 92, and the door that had previously been chained shut now appears open, as if someone has just entered. Carefully, Tony pushes the door open. Inside the room, he finds a row of mannequins, neatly arranged. However, among all those mannequins, there is one that looks different because it is covered with a cloth and appears to be moving. Convinced that someone is hiding there, Tony quickly approaches and pulls away the cloth. But when the cloth is removed, it turns out to be just another mannequin. Suddenly, the door behind him slams shut and locks by itself. Then from within the darkness, Tony sees his own daughter slowly walking toward him. The figure embraces him tightly before slowly inserting one of her fingers into Tony's mouth. After hearing the story, Philip tries to find another explanation by visiting a priest at a church who had also heard Tony's story before. The priest explains that since experiencing that strange incident, Tony has become a much more religious person. For the first time in many years, Tony even went to visit his daughter at the hospital where she's been receiving treatment. Something surprising happened during that visit. According to the doctor who was treating her, the daughter's heart rate suddenly increased significantly when Tony stood near her. For Tony, the moment felt like a message, as if his daughter truly wanted to see him after being separated for so long. Hearing this explanation makes Philip reflect on his own life again. Without wasting time, he decides to visit his father, who is now lying ill after suffering a stroke, something Philip rarely did before. After completing the investigation of the first case, Philip moves on to the second case, which leads him to the home of a young man named Simon. When Philip arrives at the house, Simon's parents are standing silently like statues, almost as if they do not care about what is happening around them. While walking through the house, Philip notices an old photograph that feels strangely familiar. In the photo, 4 teenagers are standing near a small tunnel. While going up the stairs, Philip becomes confused because he does not know where Simon's room is located. At that moment, he briefly sees someone walking down the hallway wearing blue clothes, but a few seconds later, Simon appears and invites Philip into his room. The room is filled with drawings and photographs depicting terrifying figures such as demons, devils, and images of hell. The air inside the room also feels very suffocating. Simon's behavior itself appears very strange. He explains that in the house it is only him and his parents, who rarely pay attention to his life. His older sibling has long been married and lives somewhere else. Hearing that, Philip immediately remembers the figure he saw earlier in the hallway of the house. If there are really only 3 people living there, then who was the person Philip saw before? To answer that question, Simon immediately opens the door of his room and shows the corridor outside, which now looks darker than before and completely empty. Simon then closes the bedroom door again, but right after the door shuts, a knocking sound comes from the other side.
Can you go away, please? We're trying to talk.
Can you help me?
I'll try.
I'm not the same person I was. It's wild. It's not the same.
After the atmosphere becomes slightly calmer, Simon finally begins to tell the strange experience he once had. The incident happened one night when he was driving his father's car home along a road that passed through a forest. Simon had never told his parents that he had not yet passed his driving test, so that night he was secretly driving without permission. In the middle of the trip, his father called and scolded him for coming home too late. At that exact moment, something suddenly appeared in the road and Simon had no time to avoid it. The car he was driving hit something. When Simon got out to check what had happened, he was shocked because the figure he struck did not look like a normal human. The creature had a body shaped like a human, but its head resembled a goat. Terrified, Simon quickly returned to the car and drove away as fast as possible. However, not long after that, the car suddenly broke down in the middle of the quiet forest. The situation made Simon panic even more because his phone had no signal at all. He tried walking away from the car to search for signal until he finally managed to contact a towing service. Unfortunately, the help would only arrive about 40 minutes later. Trapped alone in the forest after such a strange incident, Simon could only return to the car and wait. But the tension of that night was not over because soon he felt that the figure he had hit earlier began to appear again and disturb him.
Hello.
Hello.
National Breakdown. Can you give me the car's registration? Somewhere between 10 and 45 minutes, okay?
Fuck that!
After hearing Simon's story, Philip decides to personally check the location where the incident happened. There, Philip finds a large fallen tree, and when he looks at its roots, their shape briefly resembles the creature Simon had described earlier. However, for Philip, the sight only strengthens his belief that Simon's experience was nothing more than a misperception caused by fear in the dark and silent forest.
I've now investigated 2 of your cases quite thoroughly. I understand all too well, especially when we're tired and emotional.
After facing those 2 cases, Philip still holds firmly to his original belief. For him, the experience of Tony and Simon do not prove the existence of any supernatural force. He believes Tony's experience is simply a reflection of his guilt toward his daughter, whom he rarely visited, while Simon's experience is nothing more than a misunderstanding of the shape of tree roots. In Philip's view, many apparitions that people consider supernatural are actually the result of the human mind being influenced by fear, sadness, or emotional pressure. However, something rather strange happens when Philip is about to leave the place. As he walks back to his car, he briefly sees the reflection of his own shadow in the glass, and it disappears the moment the door opens. The investigation then continues to the third case given by Charles. This time, Philip meets a wealthy businessman named Mike. Mike claims he experienced 2 strange incidents in his house which he believes are related to a poltergeist phenomenon. Mike begins telling the first experience he had. The incident happened one afternoon when he was at home, waiting for news about his wife, who at that time was undergoing a pregnancy examination at the hospital because she had severe bleeding. During that time, he personally saw several objects suddenly being thrown by themselves. While telling the story, Mike takes a shotgun, although it is still unclear why he is holding the weapon. After explaining the first incident, Mike continues with the second experience, which he says was far more terrifying. The event happened at night when the atmosphere in his house began to feel increasingly unnatural. If previously he only experienced strange disturbances, such as objects moving by themselves, this time he claims he saw a figure that looked exactly like his wife suddenly appear in front of him. Mike then explains to Philip that earlier that same day he had received tragic news from the hospital. His wife did not survive after giving birth to their baby prematurely. The loss became an extremely heavy blow for him. After telling all of this, Mike appears desperate while gripping the shotgun he has been holding, and from his expression, it is clear that he is in a very fragile emotional state. In the end, Mike uses the shotgun to take his own life. After the tragic incident happens, Philip, overwhelmed with panic, immediately leaves the place and heads back to the caravan where Charles lives. Without wasting time, he directly accuses Charles of being behind everything that has happened since the beginning. According to Philip, the 3 cases given to him were most likely staged situations deliberately arranged so Charles could regain public attention and return to television. Philip even believes the entire situation is a scheme meant to ruin his reputation, as if Charles wanted to take back the popularity Philip has gained over the years. In Philip's view, the 3 cases are no different from the supernatural stories he has exposed many times before. All of those strange events, according to him, are nothing more than manifestations of fear, guilt, and anxiety from the people who experienced them. However, Charles responds to the accusation by saying that reality is not always the same as what appears on the surface. Before Philip can fully understand what Charles means, Charles suddenly tears off his own face. It turns out the face Philip has been seeing all this time is only a prosthetic mask, a fake layer of skin covering the real identity underneath. When the layer comes off, Philip is shocked to realize that the person standing in front of him is not Charles at all, but Mike. The shock does not end there. Mike then tears apart part of the caravan wall and reveals that the entire room is actually just a fake set made from thin sheets of paper. Soon after that, Philip is forced into another space, and now he finds himself standing on a railway track. Mike begins pressuring Philip with a question, forcing him to explain the meaning behind a sequence of numbers that seem random. 6, 79, 19, 11, 92, and 20. When Philip hears those numbers, his expression immediately changes. He is confused about how Mike could possibly know them, because the events connected to those numbers come from Philip's school days, and Mike never attended the same school as him. Mike then tries to drag Philip into a forest area that looks very similar to the location where Simon's incident previously occurred. Philip refuses to follow, but suddenly something extremely strange happens as the environment around him slowly changes. Philip now finds himself in a different place where 2 teenage bullies named Freer and Tom are standing nearby. Close to them is a small tunnel with the number 81 written on its wall. At the same time, Philip realizes that he has also changed back into a teenager, complete with the school uniform he once wore during those years. Without hesitation, Freer and Tom immediately begin treating him roughly just like they used to in the past. Soon, another boy arrives named Callahan, a teenager with autism who always wears a hoodie jacket. Freer and Tom then start playing a cruel game with Callahan by ordering him to crawl into the narrow tunnel. They tell him that inside the tunnel there are 10 numbers written along the walls that he must find and read one by one. If Callahan manages to find all of them, they promise that he will be accepted into their group. Hearing that promise, the innocent Callahan looks very happy and immediately obeys their instructions. Philip, still in his teenage form, actually tries to warn Callahan that it is all just a trick, but his warning is ignored. Callahan continues crawling into the tunnel and begins reading the numbers he finds along the narrow walls.
Wanna be in our gang?
Can I?
Yeah, of course you can, mate. You see that? On the side of the Echo. What number is it?
6.
You gotta look carefully, because some of them are quite far apart, yeah? Until you find all 10 of the numbers, and then remember, if you tell me the correct number, you can be in our gang.
Callahan, the answer just need to remember the 10th one.
Yeah.
I'll start now.
No, hang on. You're gonna need this.
What?
What makes the situation even stranger is that the numbers he reads are exactly the same sequence mentioned earlier by Mike. However, a much crueler truth is soon revealed. Freer had been lying from the very beginning, because inside the tunnel, there are actually only 9 numbers. The 10th number they promised never existed. Callahan, who begins struggling to breathe because of his asthma, is still forced by Freer to crawl deeper into the tunnel in search of a number that is not there. The further he goes, the narrower the tunnel becomes, making it harder and harder for him to move. Eventually, unable to breathe properly, Callahan collapses and dies inside the tunnel. Seeing what has happened, Freer and Tom immediately run away in fear of being discovered. Philip, who at that time is still a teenager, also panics. He calls out Callahan's name several times, but it is already too late because the boy has died inside the narrow tunnel. After that scene ends, Philip returns to his present form. Standing in front of him is Mike, who says that Philip should have helped Callahan back then, or at least tried to get help from someone else to pull his body out of the tunnel. Instead, Philip, overwhelmed with fear, at that time chose to run away and abandon Callahan, leaving his body to rot inside the tunnel. Not long after that, the sound of a baby crying is heard.
You left him to die in there, didn't you? What could I have done? Told someone? I wasn't the one who made him go in there.
That's right, you did nothing.
Mike then reveals that the baby is his child. What makes the situation even more disturbing is when the baby is suddenly fed using cat food. Before leaving the place, Mike says that all this time, Philip was never truly helping people from fraudulent paranormal practices. According to him, everything Philip has been doing is simply a way to escape from the biggest mistake of his life. That mistake was when he left Callahan alone inside the tunnel until the boy eventually died. Not long after that, the figure of Callahan appears again, now in a decaying state. The figure slowly walks toward Philip, and without saying a word, he opens the coat Philip is wearing. Behind the coat, it is revealed that Philip is actually dressed in hospital clothing. Realizing this, Philip can only cry and beg for everything to stop. He keeps saying that he does not want it to happen again, which indirectly shows that this terrifying experience has already happened to him many times before. A moment later, Callahan, now appearing in a horrifying form, tears apart the environment around them, and it is revealed that the world they have been seeing is only some kind of artificial set. After that, Callahan drags Philip forcefully toward a hospital bed and inserts one of his fingers into Philip's mouth, a scene that closely mirrors the moment when Tony encountered the ghostly little girl in the first case. At this point, the major truth behind the story is finally revealed. Everything we have seen since the beginning of the film turns out to be nothing more than a dream experienced by Philip. In reality, Philip is lying in a hospital in a coma while suffering from locked-in syndrome, a medical condition in which a person remains conscious but almost the entire body cannot move. Philip was found inside his car in a weakened state after attempting to take his own life by locking himself inside a car filled with poisonous gas. The attempt failed, but it left him trapped in a comatose condition. Once this reality is revealed, many small details from Philip's dream begin to make sense. Every person appearing in the dream is actually someone present around him in the hospital. Tony, who appears as a night security guard in the dream, is actually a hospital janitor who often cleans the floor near Philip's room. Simon is actually a young doctor working at the hospital. Mike is the senior doctor responsible for Philip's treatment, while Charles is Mike's professor or mentor. Many small elements within Philip's dream world actually originate from things happening in the real world around him. For example, when Mike in the dream says that shooting oneself in the head is a more effective way to end life than using gas inside a car, it reflects Philip's real suicide attempt using gas in his vehicle. The scene of Mike holding a shotgun in the dream becomes a symbolic representation of that idea. The same applies to Simon repeatedly receiving calls from his parents while working, or Tony cleaning the hospital floor while placing a mirror near Philip's face so that his reflection can be seen in the window of the room, all of which appear as details inside Philip's dream. Even though his body is paralyzed, Philip can still faintly see and perceive some of what happens around him. The same pattern appears in many other objects within Philip's dream. Everything he sees in that dream world actually comes from fragments of reality around him. A yellow doll sitting on a hospital chair transforms into the ghostly little girl in his dream. The oxygen tube placed on his face is imagined as a finger being inserted into his mouth. When examined more closely, the 3 cases Philip experiences in the dream are actually reflections of the guilt he has been carrying for years. The first case represents his regret for not spending enough time with his sick father. The second case represents his guilt for never telling anyone about Callahan's death in the past. This is symbolized through Simon's story about hiding the truth of his failed driving test, along with his parents who appear cold and indifferent, mirroring Philip's own relationship with his family. Meanwhile, the third case reflects Philip's deep loneliness because he spent most of his life focusing on his career until he eventually felt that his life was empty without family or close relationships. In the end, every frightening event throughout the film is simply a nightmare formed from trauma, guilt, and regret that have haunted Philip for years. Philip's body cannot move at all, yet his eyes remain open, as if he is still aware and able to see what is happening around him. His mind then processes the sounds, conversations, and objects around him into a series of dreams. And the most horrifying part of it all is the fact that within the dream, Philip becomes terrified when he feels the dream is about to end. Because for Philip, the end of the dream means he must return to the painful reality where he is trapped inside a body that cannot move. This means that until he truly wakes up from his coma, Philip will remain trapped inside that dream world, reliving those events over and over again without end, until one day he finally manages to wake up from the condition and the story comes to an end.